Good morning and welcome to the Nordic and EU expert meeting on digital media and health among children and adolescents. My name is Parisa Amiri and I will guide you through today's program here in Brussels, and you are able to follow live as we discuss the research, the regulations to form solutions going forward. As you can see on the agenda here behind me, before our coffee break this morning, we focus more on the health effects, the negative effects we are seeing, and we also talk about the Nordic recommendations, what we can learn from that, and how we should get tech to follow this. And after the coffee break, we take on an international perspective with the DSA and powers like the US and China moving in very different directions on this. And we also discuss the crucial next steps going forward. And I'm glad to say we are in this room joined by the leading experts from 22 European countries. I want to applaud that. Thank you all for contributing and being here today. Thank you. Makes us confident that the answer is in this room. And now, before we welcome our speakers and panels, let's introduce our Finnish and Swedish hosts for the day to hear their thoughts behind arranging this meeting and why this is such an urgent matter. Here are the opening remarks by Finnish and Swedish Minister Kaisa Juuso and Jakob Forssmed.
First of all, a very warm welcome to all of you, both you in the room in Brussels and those of you watching online. My name is Jakob Forssmed, and I'm the Minister for Social Affairs and Public Health in Sweden. And I am truly pleased that you are gathered here today. This meeting marks an important step towards strengthening our professional networks and cooperation, both within the Nordic region and across the European Union, on a very urgent public health issue. The impact of digital media on the lives and health of our children and youth is truly a defining challenge of our time. As a Minister for Public Health, I find it extremely worrying that today children spend more time in front of screens than they do sleeping or playing. I know that my Finnish colleague, Minister Juuso, also shares this concern. I fear that we are about to lose an entire generation to endless scrolling and deep rabbit holes, and this is happening right now while we are watching. We are also witnessing deeply concerning trends in the mental health of our young people, with rising levels of anxiety and stress. At the same time, more and more young people are leading sedentary lives with reduced physical activity and disrupted and shortened sleep. This should be a wake-up call for all of us and be seen as serious warning signs that demand urgent and collective action. And just the other month, in March, I met with my European colleagues in Warsaw to discuss these issues at the highest political level. The unity in the room was clear. Europe must come together to save our children and young people. We must show that health and well-being of our children and youth is non-negotiable. So again, I'm glad that you are meeting in Brussels today. You are all experts and we are in deep need of more knowledge. We need to share experiences on the measures needed to safeguard the health and well-being of our young generation. But now is also the time to act on what we already know. And how we choose to act will shape not only individual lives, but the very foundation of our societies in the years to come. So I hope you will have a fruitful meeting today, filled with constructive dialogues and shared insights, and that you will be inspired in your continued efforts. I know there will be very sharp and distinguished speakers here today. Hopefully, this meeting will also spark some great opportunities for further cooperation and collaboration. And I hope that when you leave today, you leave with a sense of renewed commitments and maybe also some concrete ideas on how we can move forward together. There is great potential in this room, and I look forward to seeing how today's discussions will shape the next steps in our collective efforts. Again, a warm welcome and hope you will have a great meeting. Thank you.
Dear guests, I welcome you to this Nordic and EU expert meeting on digital media and health among children and adolescents. My name is Kaisa Juuso and I am the Minister for Social Affairs and Health in Finland. My colleague, Minister Forsmed, and I have concerns when it comes to the rapid increase of screen time on children and young people's health. Digital environments are part of everyday life for children and young people. It is important to understand how these environments contribute to and harm their well-being. While many aspects of life have become digitalized, the basic principles of children's development have not changed. Children still need to play, engage in physical activity, explore their environment and experience things as part of a community. They also need to get enough sleep. Striking a balance between digital environments and other activities is important. It is good to recognize that the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Digital environments offer positive opportunities for social interaction, acquiring information, learning, and accessing services. For children living in sparsely populated areas or for lonely and disabled children, digital solutions make it possible to participate in their communities and access services. There is a link between excessive use of digital media and applications and difficulties with sleep, studying and learning, and reduced physical activity. These phenomena are also linked to inequality. Especially families with other challenges may find it difficult to restrict unhealthy gaming behavior or protect children and young people from harassment on social media. Finland's goal is to build a safe and balanced everyday life and future for children. Media literacy and a good understanding of how digital environments work are important. We need to have open discussions on ethics, empathy, and healthy ways of interacting with one another. To ensure digital safety and to protect children and young people from harmful digital content, we need regulation and measures at the European and national levels. Finland has placed restrictions on the use of phones in comprehensive schools. The Nordic countries have good examples of preventive measures of this kind. With cooperation, the Nordic countries could lead the way at the European level. When it comes to digital environments, we need a shared vision. Finland has a national network of different actors to make that shared vision a reality. The task of the network is to draw up national screen time recommendations for children and young people in their free time. Improving well-being and safety is everyone's responsibility. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your attention. Jakob Forssmed, the Swedish minister, said we're about to lose a generation. I would say at least one generation. We will see how this day can help. Thank you to our Finnish and Swedish hosts. Now, for more background on the urgency of this meeting today, we are joined by representatives from the Polish presidency and ministries of Sweden and Finland. Welcome to the stage. Hello, good morning. Let's start by introducing all of you. We have with us Sara Holsbrink. Hello, you're here from good morning, from the Swedish Ministry of Health and Social Affairs. We have with us Reija Klemetti. Hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
From the Finnish Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, and welcome Karolina Konarsewska. You're the health attaché of Poland to European Union.
Hello.
Sara Holsbrink, let's start with telling us your thoughts on why we are gathering here today and what you hope can come out from today's meeting.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, it's
It's truly a pleasure to be here today, to see all of you here in this room, and also all of you watching us online. I think today is a very important meeting. We know that we heard also from the ministers that the negative effects on health on the children and youth from digital media is a great public health concern. And I think a lot of you in this room share this concern, but maybe also are committed to do something about it. And that's why I think this meeting today is very important. And it's also a sign of good cooperation with our Nordic colleagues, but also at the European level. So I'm very happy about that. And I think I will maybe repeat a little bit of what the Swedish minister said, but I think it's a really good opportunity here to meet today and to share our knowledge and experiences, and also bring with us some new insights, or also spark some new cooperation, or also discuss what will be our future actions ahead. And I hope it will be an inspiring day. I know there will be very prominent speakers, and there is a really interesting agenda. So welcome again, and I hope this will be a really fruitful day.
Thank you. And from Finland, Reija Klemetti, seeing today's extensive program, what kind of thoughts does this bring up for you for today?
Thank you. About 10 years ago, my 2-year-old granddaughter taught me how to use my smartphone, how to swipe through photos. And I remember being amazed and thinking what kind of wise and gifted digital generation is growing up among us. However, 10 years have passed, and while I'm still impressed, I'm no longer only amazed, I'm also concerned. The digital world is nowadays an integral part of the lives of young children and young people. It offers limitless opportunities for learning, creativity, and connection. Now, when my granddaughter is almost a teenager, turning 13 soon, the phone is pretty important for her, even though she said that she could live without it. Mostly, she uses it to stay in touch with her friends, texting, and even making actual phone calls. However, as we have heard, and as we all know, we have a growing research evidence on the harms of digital devices. And I think that our job as experts and decision makers is to ensure that the digital world is safe, healthy, and human for all children and young people. And therefore, a warm thank for organizing this important meeting.
Very true about the responsibility going from amaze to concern. That's really it. And with us, Karolina, Poland is currently holding the presidency of the Council in the EU. What has your experiences on this issue been in the Polish presidency?
First of all, let me thank you for inviting me to this very important meeting, and good morning to all participants gathered here in the room, but also in front of their screens. The topic of mental health of kids and adolescents is a very important one. Don't have to convince anyone about that. We had a look at this topic from the perspective bearing in mind experiences from the COVID pandemic time. So mental health became a topic that was widely discussed because many people experienced mental health problems even more due to, lockdowns, which we in Poland experienced a lot, perhaps you people from Scandinavian countries a bit less. On the other hand, we see digital technologies, something that was for us sometimes life-saving during COVID pandemics. It enabled us to work, to contact with colleagues, to contact our doctors, to keep social contacts, etc., etc. But from our perspectives, it looks that for many people, this lockdown mode is not over yet. We see people glued to their screens, and scientists say and agree that overuse, misuse of digital technologies is not healthy for us adults. And what about still growing brains of young people? That's why we decided to combine topic of mental health of kids and adolescents and digital technologies all together, and work on council conclusions on mental health of kids and adolescents in the digital context. This document is to be hopefully adopted by Coreper soon and to be agreed and adopted finally by ministers during EBSCO Council in June in Luxembourg. This is something where we call for actions both on national, EU and EU national mixed level. We hope that this will be the very beginning of a broad discussion and actions to be taken on many different levels.
The beginning on actions on many levels. Very true. We thank our representatives for this excellent foundation for starting this day and hosting this day. Thank you so very much, and we continue. Thank you. Our next speaker will share what today's best research tells us. As Reija said, there are growing evidence data for this question. We have from Sweden's Public Health Agency, welcome Helena Frilingsdorf. Helena, here we are standing. You are one of the organizers for this day and this meeting. Can you tell us what has been your role in this project?
Absolutely. So I've led this, the Swedish Government Commission on Digital Media and Health among children and adolescents since the start in 2023, together with my colleague Sara Fritzell. So we're really excited to be here today and take this to a more international and broader level. And we started by compiling the best available knowledge and research together with the Swedish Agency for the Media, who are also here today and who have been really helpful in organizing this meeting. So we're thankful for that. And we've also done this in close collaboration with our Nordic colleagues.
Yes, and now we're very curious. Go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. All right, so I will talk about the health effects of digital media on young people and children. So our knowledge is based on thorough reviews of the scientific literature. And we've also done some in-depth analysis of national statistics, and in order to see that the knowledge and recommendations are anchored with the target groups, we also made extensive dialogues with children themselves and with parents. And they all agree that digital media can be fun, entertaining, and a great way of connecting with friends. But they really want to know, what are the harmful effects? What should we avoid? So that's what we set out to evaluate. And as I said, we've done this in close collaboration with Norway and Denmark. And we also had discussions with the WHO, who have issued recommendations on screen use before. So let's look at the scientific evidence. And just to be clear, we just looked at leisure time use, not school-based use. So our most reliable and robust piece of evidence from the scientific literature is that high screen time, screen use before bedtime, and having a smartphone or a digital device inside of the bedroom during the night can lead to shorter and poorer quality sleep. And this has been shown in multiple longitudinal studies, such that we know that the screen use came first and then the sleeping problems. But of course, it can go in both directions. We also see that high screen use can lead to depressive symptoms, partly through sleep. Sleep is just so fundamental for both physical and mental health. Another clear finding is that high use of social media can lead young people to be less happy about their own bodies. And this is perhaps not very surprising, considering that all of the big social media platforms are financed through advertising. And no advertiser or influencer can make money from telling people that you look great just the way you are, you don't need to buy a thing. So that's how it goes. We also seen that high use of screen can lead to poorer concentration. And that is seen over time, both in children with or without ADHD diagnosis. So now I've talked a lot about the screen use of children and adolescents, but what about us, adults and parents? Well, research also shows that parents who, for example, use their cell phone a lot when they're together with their children, that can lead to impaired interaction and can lead the children to be more acting out. So we also need to think about our use. Okay, and the scientific evidence that I've talked about so far has been longitudinal, which is the nearest thing that we can come to causal evidence in epidemiologic research. But there's also a massive body of cross-sectional data. This is a picture of me looking at cross-sectional data. No, anyway, so what we see is that high screen use and symptoms of mental ill health often walk hand in hand. And when we talk to young people, they often tell us that if you're feeling low, if you're having problems at school or at home, it's so easy to turn to your phone for distraction and as an escape from negative feelings. And then you easily get caught in a negative spiral of more use, more loneliness, going to bed later, and then you're trapped. And it's not easy to get out of. And we also know that the phones and the platforms are designed to be addictive. And speaking of that, in Swedish national surveys, we see that 53% of teenagers report that they use their smartphones more than they wish for themselves, and that they would rather do other things more, but they don't really know how to make that change. It's so much easier to just pick up your phone than to call your friends and go outside and play. And last but not least, international statistics also shows that 8% of boys meet criteria for internet gaming disorder, and about 9% of girls meet criteria for problematic social media use. So that means that we have approximately 4 million young people within the European Union who have such severe problems with addictive screen use that they need professional help. So we need to roll up our sleeves and act now to promote safe and balanced use of digital media. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Helena. Thank you. Many worrying developments, as we said. You mentioned dialogues with the target groups. What do children and adolescents themselves say about this matter?
Well, first of all, it's very clear that they use screens a lot. It's usually the first thing they do when they wake up and the last thing that they do before they go to bed. So it's really normal for them. But when we start talking about the negative effects, the first thing that they say is that it's so addictive. It's so difficult to quit, and we don't really know how to do it. And if we can't pick up the phone every time we have a boring moment, what should we do instead?
If even adults struggle with this, I can imagine these thoughts. And for more perspectives from our youth, we have a filmed interview to share with you all here.
Jag tycker det bästa med skärmar är att jag kan hålla kontakten med vänner och familj utan att behöva träffa dem fysiskt.
Sociala medier kan ju vara bra för att du kanske lär känna folk. Det kan vara en plattform för ungdomar liksom, att träffa andra och sånt.
Man kan lära sig saker och liksom få information från andra som har liksom, viktiga saker att säga, så kan de förmedla i video.
Jag skulle säga att det sämsta med skärmanvändning är att min koncentration och fokus har liksom förstört helt. Jag vill att mitt liv ska vara som en TikTok, att så här, varje 15 sekunder så händer en ny grej. Liksom. Det måste bara så här, hända saker hela tiden, så att jag får liksom dopaminkickar till min hjärna hela tiden.
Det handlar väldigt mycket om hur man ska se ut och att många liksom filmar sig själva och visar upp sig. Men att det kan koppla till stress också, att man börjar tänka på hur man själv ser ut.
Jag tror att jag skulle ge till mitt yngre själv är spela mindre, socialisera mer. Det är bara det. Jag tror att det är bra med åldersgräns på sociala medier. Ju högre åldersgränsen är, desto bättre. För då har man då lärt sig att få en självuppfattning av vart man ligger i livet.
Om jag skulle ge ett råd till mig själv när jag var 12 eller 13 så hade det nog varit att faktiskt inte börja med sociala medier överhuvudtaget. Alltså, eller i alla fall vänta ännu längre. Jag hade velat bli liksom mer informerad själv om vilka effekter det hade haft på det mentala framförallt.
Very profound. They actually said, I want my life to be like TikTok. It's a very clear message, I would say. What conclusions do you draw from these interviews?
Well, I think it's very clear that they sound a little bit regretful looking back at how much they used gaming and social media when they were younger. So I think it's clear that children and young people need support in regulating, both from parents, but we also know that there are very powerful commercial interests at play.
Definitely, that parents and children are expected to bear the burden of themselves. Thank you so much for this base of knowledge, Helena Filingsdorf, starting off today. Very nice. And as we actually just touched on, our next presenter will show the effects that commercial powers have had on public health from different industries, and with this, examples of other regulations that have been made and perhaps should be made. Please welcome Professor from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Mark Pettigrew.
So thanks very much. Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about these important issues. It's a fantastic opportunity to raise concerns about commercial determinants of health more generally. So I'm a professor of public health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And there are a group of us who work on different commercial drivers of public health. We do work on food, alcohol, tobacco, some work on digital media, some work on opioids, fossil fuel industry, etc. So commercial determinants of health, some of you may already be aware of the term, many of you will, but it refers to the systems, practices and pathways through which commercial actors drive health and health equity. And social media and digital media fit very squarely into this definition. Quite often when we talk about the commercial determinants of health, we think about just, I suppose you would call them traditional unhealthy commodity industries, which cause significant health damage, alcohol, tobacco, ultra-processed foods, etc. But the definition is quite broad, and I think one of the important aspects of the commercial determinants of health is that it's not a way of separating industries into good industries and bad industries, but it's an analytic lens which can help us to think about the potential harms of commercial actors and how they're caused, not just the products, but the strategies as well. Just move my mic. So in that paper, the Lancet Commission talked about 7 commercial sector practices that negatively affect health. I won't go through them all, but just to pick out a few of them. The political practices, and that includes the lobbying and the policy substitution which corporations engage in, and by policy substitution, that refers to the fact that industries will engage in partnerships and charity work and corporate social responsibility activities in order to interfere with effective policy making, in order to prevent effective policies which regulate their activities being put in place. They engage in scientific practices, they interfere with the science, the digital media companies do this. Their marketing practices drive demand and consumption, and so on. So I won't go through the list in detail, simply to point out that all of the practices which are listed here also apply to digital media companies. I think the other thing to realize is that the harms of some of these commercial actors are not just something which happens accidentally or it's a byproduct. It's actually designed in. It's a key part of the business model. So in the case of tobacco, tobacco products are designed to be addictive. This is something that the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, I think Article 9, seeks to limit. Thanks. But tobacco kills up to half of its users who don't quit. Most of them in low and middle income countries. Alcohol, there's a very interesting study in the UK, and there's no reason to think that this doesn't apply elsewhere, but the study showed that people who drink above the guideline levels, i.e. who drink at harmful levels, are estimated to account for 68% of total alcohol sales. So in other words, the alcohol industry is actually dependent on harmful drinking. It's not just something which happens, it's part of the business model. The creation of harm is necessary for profits. Gambling, this is a quote from my colleague May van Skelkbeek, who is a public health doctor who has worked extensively on gambling. This is a quote from one of her papers. The evidence shows equivocally that everyone is at risk of being harmed by the gambling industry, both online and in land-based venues. The business model is to exploit universal biases and normal cognitive functions in order to extract as much money as possible, using products and practices designed for this purpose. You could take this quote and you could apply it directly to digital media. The design of digital media products, like some that we've heard about, depend upon a business model which is to exploit universal biases and normal cognitive functions. And ultra-processed foods, which I mentioned, we often hear that, well, everyone needs to eat and food is different. In fact, a significant proportion of food company profits come from creating harmful products. A substantial proportion of the income from the corporate food system is generated by ultra-processed food manufacturers, high levels of consumption of which damage human health and damage planetary health. So I'll just point you, sorry, I'm slightly croaky today, but I'll point you to this really excellent paper by my colleagues Mark Buzzanoni, Nora Kenworthy and Nathan Manny. And it's freely available online. And they describe how the social media industry is a commercial determinant of health. And just to pick out 5 points that they make. First of all, it depends on addictive design and behavioral manipulation, the same as the other industries that we talked about. It depends on the known harmful content of products, like the gambling industry, like the tobacco industry, like the alcohol industry. It depends upon the denial of those harms, even though it knows itself about the harms that it causes. It relies upon corporate social responsibility activities to interfere with policy making, as I said, and it distorts the science. So these industries knew and know about the harms that they cause. The tobacco industry knew for decades about the risks of lung cancer and cardiovascular disease and other conditions. The fossil fuel industry knew for many decades that it was contributing to climate change. The opioid industry knew about the harms that it caused. The food industry actually designed and designs its products to create addiction. This is described very well in one of the books on the bottom line there, Sugar, Fat, Salt by Michael Moss. And the gambling industry, again, creates products, uses algorithms to create addiction. So these books at the bottom explain in great detail the way in which the toxic content is actually designed into the products. The same applies, I would argue, to digital media companies. Just quite briefly, one of the ways in which all of these industries attempt, as you will know, to interfere with effective policy making and effective public health action is to set up partnerships with public health, partnerships with policymakers and so on. There's a lot of evidence on this. These partnerships, these sorts of public-private partnerships don't work and they're harmful to public health. Jonathan Marks has an excellent book on this, The Perils of Partnership. And there's quite a nice quote in that book, just the last bullet point. A distinctive feature of these arrangements in collaboration with corporate actors is that they are causing or exacerbating the very problems that public health agencies are trying to solve. So the sort of partnerships that we get with digital media companies are also harmful in themselves. The thing that we often forget, I think, in public health is that these industries that often are the subject of partnerships around public health topics or health and well-being topics, is that these industries have no competence in public health. They have no competence or interest in improving public well-being, and we need to continually repeat to ourselves that industries have no competence in these areas. But one of the things which these industries do is to seek to blur the boundaries of their competence and make us dependent upon them. So it's another thing that we need to be aware of. So I'm sure many of you have read this book by Sarah Wynne Williams, who had written about Facebook and wrote about her experiences. There's some really interesting quotes in this. I won't go through them all, but she has quite a nice quote, which she's talking about German colleagues. She says, "Where others see a website that's good for wasting time, Germans see a comprehensive surveillance tool that needs muscular oversight." And I think that's quite a nice summary of how we just think what we're looking at is people just scrolling. These are dangerous tools. I mean, they have benefits. We heard about that in the discussion with the young people. So they also have benefits, but we also, like for any intervention, need to be very aware of the potential harms and be prepared to prevent those harms. I won't go through the rest of the quotes just in terms of time. And because I want to get to the point at which we can think about what we need to do. So the first thing we need to do is to think about what to stop doing. We need to stop doing the things that we know don't work and risk causing harm. What are they? One of the things we need to stop doing is focusing solely on individual responsibility, and this cuts right across all of these industries. And that means the sole focus on digital literacy campaigns as magic bullets that shift the blame to individuals, that shift the blame to children and teachers and parents, and shift the blame away from the companies and the platforms that create the harm. This is the lesson that the evidence shows from the other industries that we've talked about as well. Self-regulation, another thing that we can start stopping. Self-regulation by industries, all of these industries, the evidence shows time and time again that it doesn't work, and it's used by these industries to delay and replace effective public health action, effective policies. And self-regulation is designed to allow industries to continue with business as usual. We also need to stop framing the problem as a matter of misuse by irresponsible users. We can't talk about, the fact that some young people or some adults overuse or abuse the technology. It's designed in to make you do that. We cannot simply point out that this is a matter of irresponsible use. I think that's quite a dishonest framing of it, which we need to move away from. These are designed in features the same way that overuse is designed into alcohol consumption and tobacco consumption. Harmful partnerships, I've talked about. And I think the other really important thing probably to finish on is that we need to stop the harms at source. If a product is not safe, why is it even being marketed to users? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for this. Comparisons to the fossil industry, the gambling industry. If you didn't have arguments coming in, you will have now. To summarize together, let's start to stop. That was a very simple list of steps to follow. But what is so harmful about the tech companies' business models? To summarize.
So just to pick out one thing which I talked a little bit about, I think one of the really harmful aspects is that the harmful consumption, it's part of the business model, a bit like the other industries that I talked about. It's designed in. They're designed to prevent people not use them. The endless scrolling, for example, the other aspects, the algorithms and so on. The harm is actually the creation of harm and the creation of addiction is actually built into them. That's a very harmful model, but it's the same model that is used by the gambling industry, particularly the use of algorithms to target people, to chase people down, and to make it difficult to say no and step away in the way that we heard.
Even for adult brains, as we said.
Also for adults, yeah.
Yes, so addictive design, in your thoughts, can be compared to alcohol and tobacco industry?
Absolutely. So the same way that the tobacco industry knew that its products were addictive and designed products to ensure that that was the case, this is what happens with harmful industries generally. And the same with alcohol and alcohol consumption. It's a bit like that last bit of what I was talking about, talking about irresponsible users and so on. You cannot tell people that they're irresponsible when you have pushed a product on them which has prevented them from making active, rational choices to step away from the product. So there's either a hypocrisy in all of this, which we have to be aware of too, I think.
Very good, thank you. And I hope everyone paid close attention. Otherwise, seek out Mark Pettigrew for more on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. With this, we introduce our next speaker for a comparison of screen use recommendations in the Nordic countries. What can we learn from this? And can we speak of a Nordic model? Please welcome from the Public Health Agency in Sweden, Sara Fritzell.
Thank you. So happy to be here this exciting day. I'm here to talk about similarities and differences in screen use recommendations. And is there a Nordic model? Well, the Nordic countries have a lot of things in common. We're known for progressive social policies, high level of digitalization, and there are also similarities when it comes to norms and culture, in particular when it comes to parenting and also childhood. And all the Nordic countries have been working on recommendations for a few years, although we're at different parts in this process. Finland is now drafting recommendations, for example. And the examples I will show here of themes that are similar build on the research that Helena told you about, and also about dialogues with parents and children and what they need help with, including what children and adolescents need to feel good and develop well. So let's have a look at the similarities. The first one is no screen use for children under 2. And this is because what children need to develop is to have face-to-face interaction, exploring the world, and also to have physical play. The second one, and one that's really important, is no screen use before bedtime and no interruption during sleep. And this is, of course, because it makes you sleep shorter and poorer, and we all need sleep to develop and feel good. So the best recommendation would be to leave your devices outside of the bedroom when you go to sleep. When it comes to parents, this is really important, and I think the most important message is that parents need to consider the digital world as sort of the real life world, to be engaged in their children's lives. To be role models, children do as we do, not as we say. And also, it's good to have family rules, for example, not having screens during mealtime. Also, as children grow older and they start using social media and gaming more independently, it's really important to be aware how this usage affects children. What about marketing? What about harmful content? Be aware of that, and also online behavior. Also, to balance your own time. This is something that comes up in all the recommendations. That's really important. Because the algorithms are so powerful, you need really to make sure that you get time for the activities that children and adolescents need. And finally, age restriction. There is an awareness that use of smartphones and social media does have effect on health. And what about time? It's not included here, and that's because there is no universal hourly daily hour usage. When we look at the research evidence, we see that there is a boundary between perhaps from half an hour up to 3 hours, and after that it can become harmful. So all the countries have included this in their recommendations, depending on the age of the child then. But it's mostly about, it's not, the screen use shouldn't push aside the other activities you need to feel good. What about the differences between the countries? There are some differences, for example, in the age brackets used, the wording, whether it's more restrictive, and so on, and also about the arenas that we sort of turn to. For example, in Denmark, they have comprehensive ethical guidelines to the tech companies, and Sweden has a shorter version of this. And when it comes to Norway, they have more of a whole of society approach, including school time. So I see a lot of similarities, and it's not about banning the screens, it's about striking a balance that considers child health and development, and also the digital opportunities that this world holds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara Fritzell. And concluding this, is there a Nordic model, would you say?
I would say it looks like a beginning of one, with the collaboration that we have also, so it's very exciting.
You're hopeful.
Very hopeful.
I can tell. Thank you so much, Sara Fritzell, for this, and we will carry on this same theme. Next in today's program are brief insights from each Nordic country. I have called this a sort of informational speed dating, if you will, meeting each country for a couple of minutes to know about their experiences, current situations, and challenges going forward. So please welcome to the stage our Nordic representatives. Go ahead. Stiligt. Hello, I think we should start with Denmark. Am I being correct? Jens Christoffersen, welcome. You're from the Danish Health Authority. If you start off by telling us your current status and what kind of challenges you face.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to share our experiences on this very important subject. Yeah, one of the main challenges that we are facing right now is about knowledge. Our current recommendation is based upon the assumption that time spent on screen use is less time spent on activities that we know for a fact is important for our health, such as sleep and physical activities. But when we look at our 12-year-old children in Denmark, they almost everyone have a smartphone. And most of them are doing quite well, having a good mental health, but a great proportion of them are also suffering from stress and feeling insufficient. So if we are concerned about the mental health of our children and our teenagers in connection with screen, we used to have a more detailed understanding of the connection about screen content, the context of which the screens are being used, and the coping resources of children and teenagers in relation to screen use. And we need this to have a more detailed discussion about recommendations and screen time. Yeah.
So we also want to know, going forward, what kind of possibilities do you see?
Yeah, here I want to elaborate on collaboration between authorities. The Danish recommendations, as the rest of the Nordic recommendations, are about leisure time. But we see that more and more daily activities are being integrated into smartphones and computers. So we need our smartphones in kindergartens, in schools. We need it when we communicate with authorities, when we take the public transportation, and so forth. And we need a more strengthened dialogue between the different authorities in order to find out how dependent should our children and teenagers be of their phone in their daily life, all of us for that matter, and hopefully thereby get a common understanding of how much should a smartphone and a screen be used in our daily lives. And also to strengthen the recommendations, that more authority stands behind these national recommendations. Of course, that implies that we can agree upon the recommendations across the different authorities.
Thank you, Jens, for this. Yes, the dependence on smartphones in our society, very true. Thank you. And we move on to our friends from Finland. Hello.
Hello.
Represented by Päivi Lindberg from the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare. If you want to start by telling us current status and challenges as of now.
Yes, actually, we are at the stage of building our recommendations.
We have a network of about 160 different stakeholders, so because we see this as a very, very common and systemic issue. And we are going to build the recommendations during this year and the next year. I think that our strength is that we have actually identified already a need for a vision for a better future, for a kind of balanced and future enhancing the well-being of children and kind of giving them hope in this very difficult era. So this is one of the strengths, and the network really kind of gives us a good foothold for building this together. So we have realized that we cannot do this alone. So the issue is to have everybody doing the work with us, and we have two coordinating organizations: our Institute for Health and Welfare, and the other is the Finnish Agency for Education. So we have two kind of national organizations.
But just getting started, how are you going to be inspired by many other colleagues going forward? What kind of possibilities do you see?
Well, we see a lot of possibilities on this Nordic networking, because we can also look what others have done, and we have this common discussion about the findings and what has been kind of found to be working and what not. So we have a privilege being in this situation now that we can benefit also from the others.
Definitely, thank you for that. Finland. It's almost like Eurovision up here. Now moving on to Iceland, we have with us Jenny Ingudottir, Directorate of Health in Iceland. Contrasting this, what would you say is your current situation, and what are you challenging going forward?
Yeah, so we have had screen recommendations from 2014, which we built in broad collaboration between authorities, and the challenges are more maybe getting the screen recommendations out there, how we do it in a systematic way, but also, as Dr. Pettigrew was talking about before, that we don't go into this individualism of the single parent, responsibility against the tech companies. And also that we don't spend too much time on fighting, like whose fault is it, the school lets the children be online, no, the parents aren't doing their job. Like we have to work together for this. And maybe also, as has been mentioned, that we also need to take a look inside and like how dependent are we ourselves, but that we don't increase inequity, unwillingly with our recommendations.
That's very true. That's a very big aspect of all this. So avoiding individual responsibility and blame, and going forward now, what kind of possibilities do you see?
Yeah, well, I used to be a very pessimistic person, but turns out that I'm very optimistic. So I am optimistic. Most of our children are doing great. There are great opportunities. So let's not forget that, everything is not being burned down. And we have also great systems that we can use to implement recommendations. And talking about Nordic recommendations, we have recommendations for physical activity and for nutrition, and then we build our country recommendations from that. That could be one idea going forward. Also that we use our systems like in primary healthcare, like in school healthcare, but mostly that we work together jointly for this to reap the benefits of the technology and not be the slaves of it.
Only reaping the benefits. Thank you so much, Iceland. Moving on to Norway. Hello, welcome. Runar Ellesmelleror. Was that a great pronunciation? Not very.
Sorry.
But you're here from the Norwegian Directorate of Health, and we're also curious on your current status and what you are facing going forward.
Yeah, our current status is that we actually launching new recommendations this week. So that's very, very fun for us and interesting. We've been working on them for some time now. So that's something we're working on, and part of that work has been that we see some challenges with, for example, measuring effect. So we see that we use the term screen use, and I sometimes say that screen use would, when putting that into statistical models, is sort of like looking at car use when trying to find out why injuries happening from car accidents. So I think we need to go in dig deep into the term and look at, for example, car use. What kind of model is it? What kind of context is the driver? Is he alone? Is he with others? Has he been drinking? Is medication, substance use? All these kind of factors we need to put into also looking at screen use, and then we can sort of hopefully move forward with the measuring effect. Another challenge is that's been pointed out several times here is that we're sort of focusing on individual risk factors, and as Professor Pettigrew also mentioned, that we need to have this individual against the digital tech companies, and that's sort of okay. We need that, but that's sort of like a bottom-up approach. We also need to look at a top-down approach from population incidents and look at how we can perhaps regulate and move away, take the responsibility away from the individual and put it on the society and regulations instead. Because we know that social norms will be stronger in behavior than, for example, recommendations from health authorities.
And the societal harm could be great also. Very interesting, needs more precise data, I understand this as. And going forward, what kind of opportunities do you see?
That's also been mentioned here. I think that the Nordic model we have, or the Nordic collaboration, is a very good starting point. We have a good network in the Nordics. We also need to look further into the EU, so that's very fun being here today. And then we can start comparing populations instead of just within groups or samples within a country. We can look at how Denmark differs from Norway, although they're kind of similar, but still there's some differences, and we can look at that across the EU perhaps. Also over time, we can start when we have the measures we need. More specific measures, we could start collecting data and look at that over time. And hopefully you can reduce the rate of emotional distress in children and adolescents that we've been seeing.
Definitely. Thank you so much to Norway. And finishing off with Helena Frilenstorff from Sweden and the Public Health Agency. Can you tell us about the current status and challenges?
Yes, so right now we're focusing on communicating and spreading the knowledge and the recommendations. And the challenges with that is, first of all, to reach out to everyone, to get the knowledge and the recommendations through, especially to the hard-to-reach groups, such as parents who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And it's always challenging to change behaviors and norms that you're used to. We know today that many teenagers are used to being online almost 24/7. And now we're telling them, oh, but only 3 hours per day and no smartphones in your bedroom. And that's not so easy to change.
And it's also a lot of emphasis on parents, and it's a very sensitive topic. We'll talk more about that.
Yes.
And going forward, what kind of opportunities are you seeing?
Well, first of all, our recommendations were quite well received. We thought that more people would be angry or disagree, but no, most people think that they're quite reasonable and good, in fact. And we also heard from the teenagers that they're not happy, they want to make a change, and they're motivated, and that's a really good start.
As I said, informational speed dating. We are up to date also with all of you. Thank you so much to the Nordic countries for this pitch presentation. Thank you, guys. And we use this going forward today. So just summarizing, talking a lot about moving the responsibility from the individuals, whether it's parents or children, to society and corporations to change. This concludes this pitch, but after learning about the different situations where people are not very much in sync, but in different stages of the same process, you could say, we're going to now discuss the Nordic approaches from a broader perspective, including then tech industry and education. Our first panel of the day, welcome them to the stage. Come and join me, if you have your microphones, that is. Welcome. I have new people here with me. We start off by saying hello to Amalie Fudin Willesen from the Danish Ministry of Digital Affairs.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome from Norway, Øystein Nielsen.
Hello.
Hello, we're testing the mic also. How are you?
I'm very fine, thank you.
There
How
we
are you?
have it. Norwegian Directorate for Education and Training. And from the Public Health Agency of Sweden, maybe you have seen her before today, Sara Fritzell. Welcome. I would like to start by hearing about your recommendations and guidelines before we head into the public's response. Let's begin in Norway. You took this wider scope on your knowledge compilation. You included both leisure time and the school-related use. What did you find?
We found many things, but I think to summarize, it's all about balance everywhere. It has different dimensions. This thing about screens, as my colleague mentioned, it's about the time of use. It's what you use, in what context you use things. And it's also an own category that's teaching and learning, who is different use from the leisure time. So I think a kind of balanced, but okay, we see some positives, some negatives. We have to be aware on limits and always seek balance.
Because in Sweden, there is a contrast here. In Sweden, the responsibility is split between your agency and the school commission. What kind of obstacles does that mean for Sweden, would you say, Sara Fritzell?
Well, there were many people who asked us questions about, well, what about the time in school and so on. So we at the Public Health Agency, even though we have only responsibility for sort of the spare time, we got lots of questions. But the good thing is we've been working with the Swedish Media Agency also, which have good contacts in schools and so on, and lots of dialogues with personnel in school. But now there are lots of initiatives in the school sector as well, such as banning smartphones from the schools and changing the curriculum for preschools. So there's lots of things happening, but the responsibility is a bit split, yeah.
Yes. Now with Denmark, Amalie, the ethical guidelines to the tech companies in Denmark, can you please summarize them and tell us about the health perspective?
Well, what we did with the ethical guidelines, we started that in 2021, and it was a way of shifting the responsibility from parents and from the media literacy kind of way into how to make tech responsible. But none of the platforms or services that are mostly used by Danish children and youth are placed in Denmark. So we can't really use them. But this was happening while the DSA was negotiated. So now we have actually shifted much more into how to maximize enforcement in the DSA. How nationally to look at each article and say, what do we need to make more things illegal to use that article around illegal content? How can we use the article around dark patterns to protect our children and youth? And how can we help the Commission in the DSA enforcement of the very large platforms, which is what is most commonly used in Denmark? So it's really about shifting from an individual perspective to a more systemic perspective, I think.
And with the health perspective, if you could tell us a bit about that, how did you work to factor in different kind of issues?
Well, I think it's about looking at health quite broadly. So when the individual well, it wasn't actually our health department who made it. It was our media council, and I think they made a great job. And the shift was from looking at what health evidence do we need into what is okay and what is not okay. That's the benefit of looking at things ethically instead of knowledge-wise, because things are being normalized. Kids are like, it's part of the game that people write nasty things to you or send you adults send you nudes. That's just part of the game. So things are being normalized, which is and doesn't have a health effect. but it's absolutely not okay, even though it's might be normalized in children's digital world. So I think it's actually going away from a traditional health perspective and saying what is, as a society, what is okay and what is not okay, and how can we articulate those boundaries more clearly.
This is probably a very central divide, the knowledge and evidence-based part of it, and also utopia. What kind of society do we want? Very interesting. Norway, I know that you actually had recommendations put in place on what type of content different ages should access. Can you tell us more about that work?
It's not actually a type of content, but our recommendation for municipalities is that for the younger people, you whitelist, not blacklist. It's a technical term, but it actually means that you have to actively open content for the youngest pupils, and not the other way, ban something. So we have more control over content for the youngest pupils. Yeah.
And Sweden, is that something you have thought about, the different ages?
Yeah, when we looked into the research and so on, what we found most was about social media. So our recommendations is mostly about how to avoid the negative effects that you have on the body image and so on, to talk about what you see on social media and how it makes you feel, that kind of thing, but also to be mindful of age restrictions.
And moving on, and let's save the tech industry for last. I know everyone wants to talk about that. What has happened in the public since they were launched? Recommendations and guidelines. Maybe Norway wants to start.
I think we had a lot of recommendations for schools, and now the recommendation for health is coming. But in schools, I think in some ways we just kicked in open doors, because in mobiles was mostly banned locally. Even we did a recommendation on that. But I think the public debate is very healthy. It has a focus. We're doing these discussions in local levels, in schools, among parents. So I think that's an important part of it.
There's a kind of consensus.
Yeah, I don't think it's consensus. I think there are very the public debate is kind of polarized in some areas. But when we measure amongst parents, for example, they're mostly positive, but they're concerned about their children's safety, of course.
Interesting. And Sweden, what would you say has happened in the public?
We've been working very hard with the focus, how can we help? So we've been talking to parents, asking them what do they need in order to create a healthy and balanced and safe environment, digital environment for their children. So focusing on the areas that the parents lift up also, and trying to work with different stakeholders. I think we're trying to change norms in that way. And as Helena said, they were quite well received recommendations. So now we're trying to sort of get them out. And how can we help schools in delivering this knowledge? How can we help healthcare in doing that? So we're trying to provide them with sort of packages with information that they can use directly. So lots of things going on at the moment. And we're having one childcare unit who's going to test the material during the summer also. So the implementation is sort of moving on, really.
And Denmark, what has been the public's response?
I think there's been a huge change the last 4 years in the way that this problem is being perceived. And now the question is also how to make things that are more, not towards the tech giants, but into families. How does that, who can we hold accountable in Denmark to make that change? So for example, we are looking into the people selling phones. If we want a boundary of, we don't have that yet in Denmark, but around 13 is when it's advisable to get a smartphone. How can we get the industry that sells the phone to be part of communicating that? How can we get the municipalities to be part of helping the families who don't have the resources?
Interesting. There's a limit on energy drinks even in Sweden. So you are proposing some kind of age recommendation for buying a smartphone with the corporations?
There's been this well-being commission who proposed a limit on smartphones on 13 years, and the authorities haven't taken that in yet or taken a decision on that yet, but we are looking into it.
Prohibition era, it's interesting. Norway, you wanted to add something before we move on?
I wanted to add one thing, because this is a discussion with many layers, and one of those is values and democracy. And that's very important to acknowledge, especially in an educational view, because the role that tech and the politics are acting together these days are kind of worrying. And we also see democracy as a value is dropping amongst pupils, and we have to acknowledge that on top of all these other health things, and it's important to not forget talking about big tech and the technology.
Definitely. Now we obviously have to talk about regulation and such. Now, how has the tech companies responded to your approaches? Going back to Øystein and Norway.
I think in Norway we had a minister who was very clear amongst tech companies, almost shouting. And we see some positive things. One of them is that the Association of Municipalities has for the first time got Google in a dialogue among the Data Protection Acts and so on. It never happened before. They were not interested, actually, in schools. So there's the pressure on the big tech is quite high, but that's important. It comes from the whole EU. But something's happening. That's we're challenging their market.
Their status quo, yeah. Sarah Fritzell, just shortly, what would you say on this?
Well, from the Public Health Agency, I think that when we say something about the tech industry, they don't really care so much. They do little things, but the big questions, they still need to be resolved somewhere else. I think is evident.
We're in Brussels right now, I think we can say, perhaps the EU. And also Denmark, what would you say to this question?
Well, very much the same as the Swedish experience. I think it's very, I think everybody here probably had a meeting with a tech giant and had that slippery feeling that the issue kind of gets out of hand. And I think that's you try to ask for accountability and you get a lot of unclear answers back. So I think shifting to hard enforcement is more viable.
Let's dig a bit deeper in this one. What do you actually think is needed for the tech industry to actually follow your guidelines? What did the Denmark Amalie says?
Well, I think what I talked about before about shifting it to DSA enforcement and cooperating also with, like, for example, Roblox is a huge thing in amongst Danish youth and kids, and they are based in the Netherlands. So we have to work together with the DSA office in the Netherlands and ensure that they enforce based on also Danish monitoring and Danish data about what is actually going on, what are children experiencing online in these apps and platforms. That's one way. As I said, I also think that we have, like, that's the easy part. Looking at the article, saying, what do we want? Then there's this value-based. How do we define what is a good and nourishing place for online environment? I think in Europe we will have a huge discussion. Where do we go from nudity to porn and sexual violence? Where do we draw the line? And we have probably a common approach in the Nordic countries and a different approach in other European countries. And if we want tech to adhere to the rules, we also need to go into that messy place where we have to set value-based boundaries about what is okay and what is not okay. Because as soon as things are unclear, then that's a free space.
It feels voluntary, so to say. Quickly, also Sweden. What do you say to this matter?
Well,
I also just known as Sarah Fritzell.
No, I just agree.
Øystein, Norway?
Yeah, I agree as well. But I also think it's important to do all we can to make the choices among big tech, European too. We need to have bigger competition, and we need to make a market that where values and these things counts for what we buy and use. And there we have another big issue. We need to build up European tech.
Very interesting ideas on stage, everything from actually limiting at what age children can buy smartphones, to working together, to crossing barriers like countries. Netherlands and Roblox, what do we do there? I see everyone's taking notes, that makes me happy. And please start the conversations after this. Thank you so much to today's first panel and for everything you're doing. We're just getting started. Now I would like to keep talking, but you all deserve a coffee break. So let's see each other again in 20 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back from the coffee break. I hope all of you, as I said, leading experts from 22 European countries, had a lot of time to chat together and find solutions. And during the morning here, we've learned of the health impact and the use at group level. And now we're going to head into broadening our horizons with a global perspective. And our next speaker will share research findings from UNICEF's new report on harmful content and abusive online experience. So from UNICEF, please welcome Daniel Kadefelt-Winter.
Is this on? It's on. Thank you so much for inviting UNICEF to speak. I design and lead a lot of the research that UNICEF does on this topic of digital media use in adolescents around the world. And as an organization that advises a lot of governments, it's really, really valuable for us to be here and learn from what the Nordic countries are doing so that we can share best practices with other partners. So thank you so much to our Swedish and Finnish hosts for having us. In 2024, the US Surgeon General issued an influential advisory stating that there is a gap in evidence around the pathways through which social media causes harm. And I would extend that statement to apply to other forms of digital media as well. And understanding how and why digital media might cause harm and the types of harm it causes is critical to protect children's mental health. And I think we heard our colleagues from the Danish Health Authority reflect on this as well. The time that children spend on digital media is often flagged as a potential risk factor. We've heard that today. Very relevant when it comes to physical health. And we really need to understand more about how time spent on digital media impacts sleep, posture, physical activity, and particularly for very young children. But when it comes to mental health, the relationship is a little bit more complex. And that's where I see a great opportunity for us to improve research as well as policy and guidance. So when we speak to young people about digital media use and mental health, and we heard this on the video we saw earlier, it's a bit of a mixed response. Sometimes they say it's, it can be really empowering. Sometimes it's distressing. Often it's a mix of both. And I think we can all agree that there's a big difference between gaming with your friends after school, having fun, and being bullied or harassed or abused. And so if we want to truly understand which aspects of digital media use harm children's mental health, we need to really focus on what they're doing and experiencing in digital spaces. And that reflects comments from our colleagues from Norway earlier, which are really, really important. And that brings me to the new research that UNICEF is launching next week. We've done new analysis of two very powerful data sets, the EU Kids Online data set, collected by the EU Kids Online Network, as well as the Disrupting Harm data set that me and my team has been leading on. It covers nearly 39,000 children from 39 countries in 5 major regions of the world. And the data sets are particularly useful because they allow us to interrogate things like the time children spend online, the kind of content that they're exposed to, as well as different abusive experiences and how those relate to different mental health outcomes. And we're looking at things like low emotional well-being, anxiety, suicidal thoughts and behaviors, and self-harm. And so in this sense, we've actually been doing what our colleagues from Norway was flagging needs to be done. And what did we find? Well, first on screen time. Consistent with much of the research that already exists today, screen time alone was weakly and inconsistently associated with mental health indicators. So in other words, the time that a child spends online does not seem to be a strong or reliable predictor of worse mental health or low emotional well-being. And that finding held true for almost all of the 39 countries where we did this analysis. Now, in stark contrast, and this is important, we found that exposure to harmful content like gory images, hate speech, violent content, unwanted sexual content, as well as experiences of online bullying and online sexual abuse, were strongly and consistently associated with worse mental health outcomes. And this was true in 38 out of the 39 countries. And children exposed to online bullying and online sexual abuse in particular were much more likely to report higher levels of anxiety. They were more likely to engage in acts of self-harm, and have thoughts of suicide. And the associations were really substantial in strength and consistent across geographies. And that consistency across such diverse contexts make us very confident in the findings, even though it's cross-sectional data. So to put it plainly, what we find is that harm to children's mental health doesn't seem to be primarily driven by how many hours they're online. It's about what they experience when they're there, as well as their wider life context. So what does that mean for policy and guidance? Well, our recommendation would be to focus on reducing exposure to harmful content and preventing abusive online experiences from happening to protect children's mental health. And this includes advocating for measures like holding tech companies accountable for implementing good safety by design, effective content moderation, mandating robust reporting mechanisms and redress mechanisms for children and families who are victimized. But we also need to equip schools, health professionals, and social services with the skills to recognize, identify, and respond to online harms and understand how those interact with in-person experiences of violence. And we also need to invest in evidence-based prevention, and I think especially age-appropriate sexuality education to help children navigate relationships, consent, boundaries in a digital age, and also help them recognize signs of bullying as well as signs of abuse. Tech companies often claim that they can't control how long users spend on their platform, and perhaps that's true to an extent. But what they can do is that they can invest much more resources to ensure that their platforms are not exposing children to harm. And governments, in turn, and we've heard this, and I'm excited by what I've heard so far, governments can strengthen efforts to hold the technology industry accountable for failing to protect children, effectively require them to step up their online safety and harm prevention efforts. And I think evidence is clear that current efforts by the tech industry have been insufficient as children continue to be harmed online. So let's demand more from those who create the digital environments that children navigate in order to protect children's mental health and well-being going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this, Daniel. Now everyone's wondering, how can this be prevented? Let's go into that.
So like I said, the accountability for the tech platforms is really important, and they need to really step up efforts to prevent exposure to harmful content and bullying. However, it is really important to recognize that these are not only technologically driven phenomena, right? A lot of online bullying and online sexual abuse starts in person. Then it moves online, and then sometimes it moves back online. On top of that, sometimes it does start online with perpetrators who randomly seek out and target children. And so what we need to do better is to understand basically who can prevent what. I think that is a really important question, because some of prevention will fall to society, where we need an all-of-society approach to violence prevention. And then we need to make sure that the tech platforms do their part on top and kind of sort out the bit that happens in the digital environment.
And are there any measures that you feel should be avoided or could be inefficient?
So I am actually not a huge fan of very time-based recommendations around spending X amount of hours online. I don't think we've seen that that is very effective. I would be happy to be proven wrong. But to me, when we did this new study, we didn't see the screen time predicted either exposure to harmful content or abusive experiences. There seem to be other kind of factors that drive this that we don't really know what they are yet.
But could it hurt to reduce screen time?
Well, it could, because it also undermines children's agency, opportunity for social support, opportunities to learn and build skills, and so on.
I said
safety
reduce.
skills.
I didn't say prohibit.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, actually. So I think complete restriction, I don't think is helpful. Controlled, informed, educated use, I think, is a better way to go. However, I don't think it's about the specific number of hours. I just don't think that's the way to go. I think we need to be a little bit more relaxed in how we think about it, and also consider that children are very different. We need to consider their evolving capacities. One 11-year-old is not going to be the same as another 11-year-old.
And then there's the issue of context and content. I mean, there's a lot of debate going on around this, of course. And you mentioned this, tech companies may make it sound like they are already doing a lot, plenty, very big changes, but are they?
I mean, I think we can safely say that it's not enough. Because when we do these kind of studies or other studies, we see that a fairly large proportion of children are abused online every year. They're exposed to different kinds of harmful content. In some countries, it's something like 20% or more of children who have been abused online in the past year. Those are massive figures. It's not good enough, clearly.
That is the main point, exactly. That is not good enough. That's not what we want. Just finally, this new report from UNICEF, how could it be helpful? What are you hoping for?
I think we hope to shift focus away from only looking at screen time when it comes to mental health, and instead push governments as well as tech platforms to think more about how do we clean up these spaces? Because what we show very clearly is that it's the content and the experience that matter for children's mental health. So how do we make sure that these are good, positive experiences and get rid of the bad ones? How to do that? Big challenge, but we look forward to more dialogue with the governments and tech platforms.
Definitely, and more debates, I think, with your different opinions. Thank you for this presentation, Daniel Kadefeld-Winter from UNICEF. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
And we applaud him, definitely. Nice. Speaking of solutions, there are great hopes attached to the EU's DSA. I bet you've heard of it. The Digital Services Act and these regulations. But what is it really, and how well has it worked? We're eager to find out. To tell us about this, we welcome our next speaker from the European Commission. Welcome, Martin Harris-Hess.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here and present to you a little bit the regulatory environment here in Europe. Just to take you back and give you the context a little bit, the DSA sits in a broader approach to a safer internet for children that the Commission has been working on for many years now, which rests on three pillars: the pillar of protecting children, but also empowering children and respecting them. I will talk today mainly about the protection angle, because that's the team I'm working in, which is the protection of minors under the Online Platform Directorate, so implementing the DSA. Maybe a little recap. What are the rules in the DSA when it comes to the protection of minors? There are actually two pillars. One that applies, one specific rule that applies to all online platforms under the DSA, so independent of their size. I should probably always have the small caveat that small and micro enterprises are excluded from the application of the DSA. But the rest of them, there is a provision, it's Article 28 for the legal buffs amongst you, is the requirement to provide a high level of privacy, safety and security to minors. But then, in line with the risk-based approach of the DSA, there are specific requirements for very large online platforms. These are platforms designated by the European Commission as very large online platforms, and the requirement is that they have more than 45 million active monthly users in the EU. There are currently, I think, if I counted correctly, 25 of those very large online platforms, amongst which are all the well-known social media platforms, but also some pornographic platforms. Those very large online platforms have the duty to carry out a risk assessment and identify so-called systemic risks. And these systemic risks include fundamental rights. So the right of the child is one of them that's explicitly mentioned in the provision, the protection of minors, but also any foreseeable negative effects for the physical or mental well-being of the user. So that's not particularly children only, it's all users, but of course children and minors are a very specific vulnerable group in this respect. Once these systemic risks are identified, the very large online platforms have the obligation to put in place effective mitigation measures to address those risks. So how do we enforce these rules? Our political leaderships, as the President of the European Commission, but also our Executive Vice President in charge of online platforms, have been very clear that the protection of minors is one of the key enforcement priorities, meaning we invest a lot of resources that we have in this area. We have opened, and I can tell you that this slide already is outdated, we have opened investigations in this respect against TikTok, Facebook and Instagram, and since last week, Wednesday, also against 4 pornographic platforms, Pornhub, StripChat, XNX Videos, and I don't remember the last name, but you will see it on our website. So these are the investigations, the ongoing formal investigations where the Commission has expressed that we have doubts that compliance with the DSA is happening. So we have set out in these opening investigations why we believe that these platforms violate the rules of the DSA, in particular with those platforms both in relation to 28, so the requirement to provide a high level of privacy, safety and security, but also in relation to the conduct of their risk assessment, where we believe they haven't done this diligently enough and the mitigation measures are not effective. I've also noted here a small success that we have already had last year. So whilst we had opened the investigation against TikTok, the main investigation where we criticized, for example, that the algorithm of TikTok is designed in a way that facilitates or fosters addictive behavior, especially amongst children, and therefore leads to a negative mental health impact. TikTok introduced in the EU, and that was in Spain and France, a new version of their service called TikTok Lite, and as part of this service, they offered an incentive program. So if you watched videos, you could collect points and you could convert those points into shopping vouchers, I think with Amazon or other online retailers. We criticized that this would exacerbate the concerns we already had in relation to the main app by increasing the incentive to spend time online in a negative way, impacting the mental health of children, for example. We thought our concerns were so strong that we threatened TikTok with interim measures, gave them 48 hours to respond, and lo and behold, after 47 hours, they withdrew access to this app, and then we sat down with them for 2 months to negotiate an outcome, and they provided commitments which we made legally binding that they will not introduce such an incentive program in the EU, either in this particular app or in any other app. So this shows, I think, that the DSA's rules have teeth and do bite, even if enforcement is complex. We are navigating a legal environment, so with the resources these companies have, you can expect that most, if not all, of our decisions will be challenged in court. So we have to make sure that our analysis is legally robust, which takes time, of course, but it shows there is some teeth to the regulatory rule book. Now, I mentioned the guidelines here. So Article 28, which I mentioned earlier, the requirement to provide a high level of privacy, safety and security, also empowers the Commission to issue guidelines, to put a little bit of flesh on the bone of this construct. What does it actually mean to provide a high level of privacy? What does it mean to provide a high level of safety? We have worked over the last year on draft guidelines that are now out for public consultation. So the consultation still runs until the 10th of June. So if you are interested and haven't looked at it yet, go to our website, look at the draft, and I would welcome any comments you may have. We have, in fact, tomorrow here in Brussels, a workshop with 140 stakeholders, civil society, academia, platforms, other regulators, to go through our proposals and see whether this also makes sense. So in these draft guidelines, we set out the Commission's expectation of compliance. I think it is very important to stress these guidelines do not impose any new obligations. They are not creating any new laws. This obligation already exists and is applicable since 17th of February last year. All we are doing is we're setting out our expectations of what compliance should look like, to give platforms a little bit of an indication, especially smaller platforms who might not have the same kind of regulatory compliance teams as the big ones, so that they know what to do in order to be basically left alone by us. So then won't enforce it if they do what we tell them to do. Here's a bit of the scope. Who is covered by Article 28? As I said, it also includes smaller platforms. Particularly important to note, it also includes adult content platforms if they don't have effective age verification, because the scope of 28.1 says all platforms accessible to minors. Now, even if you provide adult content and you say my platform is not for children, it's only for 18 plus, but you don't have age verification to ensure that children don't access, you have to deal with 28.1. You are caught by 28.1, and this is also what we criticized in our opening decisions against the pornographic platforms last week, that they don't do that. So perhaps the principles, to keep it very brief, safety, and Daniel mentioned it earlier, what we expect of platforms to do is safety and privacy by design and safety and privacy by default, because we feel that the best way to ensure that this high level is ensured if you build it into the system. And we've seen up to now very often that this is an afterthought, the safety of children, and that it's done through more or less kind of well-meant content moderation. But if you build it into the design of your algorithms, of the way you provide the service, you're more likely to achieve results that are age appropriate and that will protect children from the outset. So the areas covered is service design, which includes, of course, when and how to use age assurance methods. And age assurance includes both age estimation and age verification. And we set out in the guidelines, for example, when we would expect especially age verification. Account settings, but also the interface design and the recommender system. So as I said, one of the things we're looking at also in our investigations is how do you design an algorithm to make it to avoid it showing harmful content to children, because as Daniel said, it's not the time spent, it is what you see as a child that creates safety concerns or mental health or physical health concerns. So how do you build a recommender system that avoids showing the content that is harmful? But also important is the reporting mechanisms need to be robust and need to be easily understandable by children, that they use them, because one of the kind of feedbacks we got, and we work a lot with child groups or young people in the development of our recommendations, is they often don't use those reporting tools because they don't understand how to use them, and they're so complicated. And one of the criticisms against Instagram and Facebook in our case is, I think it takes 9 clicks if you want to report a video that you find disturbing to actually get somewhere where it's sent. I mean, children would not bother doing this, and I think it's important that these reporting tools work, but also that the user itself has support, but also the guardians, so so-called parental control tools, of course not just for parents. Although I think we have to be very honest, these should not be used as an excuse. So what we see with some platforms is that they say, we have parental control tools, so we don't need to put in place any other protective measures. Just as a last thought is here our age assurance, because it's age assurance recommendations. I won't go into much detail, but we want to give a bit more clarity when platforms should introduce age verification and when age estimation is expected. That's it for now, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Martin Harris-Hess, for the presentation. You can actually remain on stage by the panel table as we enter our final panel debate for this day. We have reached the panel Connecting the Dots, where we combine all of these different perspectives and aspects we've heard about today. Regulation, legislation, as well as changing attitudes and culture. How do we reach our goals, and what obstacles are there for Europe and the world? Welcome our new panelists. Hello. We have with us Sonia Livingstone, professor from Digital Futures for Children Centre, London School of Economics. Great to have you here. We have with us Cassie Redlish. You are from the WHO Mental Health Department. Mm-hmm. And of course, they know you very well, Martin Harris-Hess. We have a lot of things to cover. Let's get started. Cassie, on today's topic, what is the role and the mandate of WHO in this question?
Well, as you all know, I think WHO is a member state organisation. Really, our mandate is to provide technical support and guidance to member states around areas that are a particular priority in order to build evidence-based policy, really. And so in this space, I think, child and adolescent mental health has been a high priority of every one of our member states for at least the last 5 years, maybe longer. This is something that we're constantly being asked about, what is driving this sort of deterioration in young people's mental health and well-being, what can we do about it? And particularly this question of, to what extent is social media and digital technologies, smartphones, having an impact in that sort of deterioration. So, I think that's sort of squarely where, just 2 weeks ago we published a policy brief in this area, and that the rationale for doing that was exactly, what our mandate is, to say something in this space, to look at the evidence. We did an evidence review. We did a mapping of policy that's already enacted and implemented across countries, including many of the countries here who are leading the way in this space at the moment.
And it has very clear 8 guidelines or recommendations, so you should look into that. You also have some practical examples, I know, including online marketing towards children and young people.
Certainly the work that we've been doing across sort of our non-communicable diseases more broadly and mental health has been looking at the sort of commercial determinants of health and mental health, and sort of this work absolutely has been linked with that these are commercial determinants of youth mental health, and so one of the recommendations is, in fact, 2 of the recommendations are firmly based on holding tech interests to account and making sure that we're sort of switching the burden of proof onto tech companies for actually ensuring that their platforms and their products are safe.
Definitely. And Sonia Livingstone, how can we as a society make it easier for parents and children to make good choices regarding health and the digital spaces and media?
Well, I think often parents are the ones that don't get reached so much. It's actually very expensive and challenging for government to kind of maintain campaigns, and I know schools try very hard to reach out to parents, but sometimes it is, the keen parents or maybe the worried parents who come. So reaching all parents with in-time knowledge is very hard. We might take the example of AI that we haven't discussed. AI has suddenly appeared in everyone's apps and platforms in the last few months. Has there been outreach to parents to explain what this means? I think this is a really critical issue.
Definitely. And we've heard here today that it is difficult to regulate tech industry and make them change. What needs to happen for tech to follow? What would you say, Martin?
I think it needs a culture shift in the tech platforms. And I think we have now the DSA as a regulatory tool that will help with that. I've been to a couple of online safety conferences where we meet tech industry. And the interesting thing is, if you speak to the online safety teams within the companies, they actually say this regulation is super helpful because they have now an ear to their CEOs. In the past, online safety was an add-on, and often an expensive add-on, and therefore it fell by the wayside pretty quickly. Now they can say, if you don't, the European Commission will fine you 6% of annual turnover, and all of a sudden they have the ear of the CEO. So there is a culture shift. It also ties in with these risk assessments that they are forced now, and we check this, and the auditors, there are independent auditors who check this, to look at the systemic risks and actually address them for the first time. Now, admittedly, and that's why we have open investigations, the first round of risk assessments we saw, I think there were quite some gaps where we expect them to do better. But it's a reiterative process. It's an annual process. The second round was already better. And I always plea for patience, even if this is an area where patience might be very short in supply, because it is a very important area to protect children.
There has been an abundance of patience, so to speak.
But I think if you have an annual kind of process where this improves each time, we see this shift over time. But we need to force them to be quicker. That is absolutely no doubt about that.
That is a good incentive also to start working on this now, because in a short time there may be fines, as Martin says. Sonia, they do make it sound like they are changing a whole lot, these companies. Are they, though? What are you seeing?
Well, I'm a researcher, and at our centre we recently looked at all the changes that companies announced that they had made over the last few years in response to the coming of the DSA, also in the UK, the Online Safety Act, and actually a whole raft of regulation is kind of gradually being rolled out. So we could see that in anticipation and following new regulation, companies have a flurry of announcements. They don't say it's because of the regulation, but there is a kind of temporal coincidence. The trick, in a way, is to see what they are not announcing, and also to evaluate whether what they have announced is really working. And sometimes I think what we know is they announce something for the positive publicity, but then later on it's retracted, or there's a kind of backsliding. And that's very expensive for civil society and regulators to kind of keep checking and keep monitoring to make sure that they keep with their good actions where they occur.
Yeah, there's a sort of greenwashing going on, so to speak. But
tech washing, yes.
Yeah, tech washing or protecting children washing. I don't know which one is better. The WHO recommends higher and enforceable age restrictions. That's one of the points in the brief. And we have seen Australia, of course, decide on the 16-year-old age limit on social media. Should European countries follow? What do you say to that? Who is anxious to go ahead? Sonia always.
I mean, I think it is a failure of our collective governments, if I may say, that we have had to come to this point. And some of us, I've been in rooms like this, consulting like this, since social media began, probably now 20 years ago. So we have been waiting a long time. And I think the call for bans everywhere and restrictions is a sign of frustration that the public doesn't want to wait anymore. So, you know, this is a very critical year, especially in Europe, to see that the change is real. But even then, I think parents, educators need to want to find a way to, if it's not a ban, I'm against the bans, because of course the tech can be a mediator to so much that is a benefit to children, and children themselves want it. But we need to find some more nuance. Is it the social media that's the problem? Is it particularly Snapchat that's the problem? Is it the gaming or Roblox? You know, we must talk with more nuance there, I think.
Also, it should be a good incentive for companies seeing Australia to kind of change fast. And we also should talk about this. Is there a conflict of interests regarding children's democratic rights and right to health through protections? This is a debate right now. What do you say, Martin?
I don't think it should be.
Yeah.
I think we should be ambitious enough to say, and that's what we're trying to do with the guidelines, for example, should be ambitious enough to say you can force an environment where the safety is built in from the start, and therefore the protection is there, and children can participate in the online space, exercise their democratic right in a safe environment. We're not there yet, I absolutely admit this, and we need to push harder those tech platforms to get there. But as you say, the kind of alternative for the tech platforms would be you exclude the children from the area, which is not something I think we as a society should strive for, because it's a blunt response to a problem that we can, I think, if we're ambitious, get sorted in a more subtle way.
It's right to information, right to community, and stuff like that. We should also talk about sextortion among teenagers via social media, like Snapchat, for example, is widespread. How can this be counteracted, perhaps via DSA?
Yeah, one of the areas in the guidelines is account settings. So for children, I think they should be private by default, with a way that you cannot easily switch to a public, so that children can only be contacted by known contacts.
But children can also be perpetrators to other children.
That for cyberbullying, we have a cyberbullying action plan that is slightly outside the DSA. I think, I think it was mentioned several times today, we need an all-society response. I'm a big kind of a proponent of the DSA. I work on the DSA, but I also know the DSA is not the answer to everything, and we need several tools in combination for that.
Now, we see different actions by powerful actors in the world. We see deregulation of tech in the US by Trump. We see tight regulation in China, for example. How should Europe act in regards to this? What do you say, Cassie?
I mean, I think Europe is acting, and I think it's been really impressive, the work that the European Commission has done. It's impressive to see what the Nordic countries are doing in taking steps forward. I think, you know, increasingly taking steps forward to think about, you know, how do we balance this approach? Because actually, you know, we're certainly not in support of banning social media from young people. In fact, the reason why we've been doing this work is in response to countries having to go to these lengths to keep young people safe online. Certainly young people want to have their safety maintained online and be able to use these platforms. So I think that, you know, Europe is already leading the way and thinking about what are balanced policy responses in this area.
But we're not isolated. I mean, we can be affected. Sonia?
Well, I was thinking, I mean, I think there's no doubt it was something of a shock when America kind of changed its approach within the last year, and a lot of the developments that we thought had kind of consensus across the West, we had to suddenly rethink. So Europe is absolutely now in the spotlight, I think, as a kind of balanced way forward that is neither incredibly controlling nor incredibly kind of laissez-faire. And I think maybe one of the things we are all watching the Commission very closely is not only about getting the guidance and the kind of rules right, but really seeing that the enforcement comes after. Because the rules are not totally kind of locking down, not monitoring everything children say, not restricting their opportunities for anything, and we don't want that. But if we're not going there, then we really need to see effective enforcement and compliance.
And to also handle all of these counter-arguments showing up, we should also answer this. Some state that there is a risk that the EU loses competitive power in the tech race if we do this. What do you say, Martin?
Yeah, this is an argument you often hear in regulation, not just in online platform regulation, but generally. And my answer, I've worked in telecoms regulation previously, it can also be a competitive advantage if you develop technology that actually protects children from the outset. I think there is a demand in society to use that technology, and I think we should make it our advantage to kind of come with socially responsible technology and export it into the world. So I don't see it.
Also with these harms we're seeing to protect children from these, we should also quickly respond to the issues of extremist views, radicalizing youth online, misogynist views, it could be. We've seen adolescents, all of us. What should be a reasonable approach to this? What do you think, Cassie?
I mean, I think this is a problem outside of the digital spaces. This is an issue that we have to tackle as communities, as society, governments, and so I think that we have to remember that, you know, digital and online spaces are sort of a reflection of what's going on in our communities, and so I think that it's a bigger issue than just thinking about.
That can easily be inflated online, though.
Absolutely.
Sonia?
I agree with that, but I also think that if we can manage to stop strangers or random people contacting children, if we can stop amplifying extreme content, then those risks of, as it were, the bad actors will be mitigated.
Content is definitely being amplified by these highly commercial algorithms. For this, we thank this outstanding panel. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful for you listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Martin and Cassie, thank you.
Thank you.
And we keep Sonia Livingstone with us. We have the we feel great gratitude for having her here today for a lecture on this very topic. Go ahead, Sonia.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, it's a privilege to have the opportunity to reflect a little, actually, on what has been said this morning, which has been quite intense and I think very productive. So I will just... Yeah. So I speak for the Digital Futures for Children Centre, which is at the London School of Economics jointly with the Five Rights Foundation. And that tells you something of what we're trying to do. We're trying to kind of bring together the evidence base that social science researchers produce with the advocacy for policy and practical change that an advocacy organisation brings. And I really want to draw the threads together today through a little of our work by bringing into the foreground children's rights. And I think children's rights have been kind of there in a number of ways through what we have said. But of course, that means a number of things about consulting children, about kind of understanding the problems as we do in our centre from a cross-national and a global perspective, also drawing, as I do, on the work of EU Kids Online and Global Kids Online with UNICEF. So the question we ask, and I think the question we are all asking here today, is not only how do we deal with the problems, but also what does good look like? And this, I think, remains a remarkably simple question to ask and a very hard question to answer. What really do we want for our children in a digital world? The digital world is not going away. We ourselves are all embedded in it. And not only are we putting the devices in our children's hands, which we can't take away again, but we are building an infrastructure for every aspect of their lives, which we cannot take away again. We are building the infrastructure in the schools, so every child is now using EdTech from earlier and earlier. We are building the infrastructure in the home, so even if the child doesn't have access, it is everywhere in the home. And we're building it in all our other ways of organizing our neighborhoods, where we invest in our play spaces, how we think about, I come from a country where there are cameras everywhere in the streets, but I think they are everywhere. So the digital has become an infrastructure, and that infrastructure is mainly commercial, mainly provided by global companies, which are kind of beyond the jurisdictions of our individual countries, and heavily technical in ways that we are all, I think, grasping to understand, running on data, running with business models that are new to us, and different, I think, from many of the previous harms that we have had to think about in children's lives. So while one thing we do in our centre is we really try to think, as Martin said also, about systemic change. And the systemic change is, if you like, a necessary direction, and also, I think, strategic for many governments who do not have infinite funds to pour into training and retraining teachers every time the tech changes, and do not have infinite funds to keep reaching out to parents every time there is the latest new risk on the latest new platform. So the systemic is a strategic decision, and that's why I think the policy developments that we have heard of today are so crucial. And why I think we need to think further, how do the policy developments, how are they interdependent with the other things? What is happening in our schools? How do we train our teachers? How do we advise parents? How do we advise all the other professionals who are working with children that we haven't yet mentioned, the mental health professionals, the youth workers, the social workers, and so forth? So, what is important about a child rights perspective? So I'm putting up UNICEF's very pretty summary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, because every country represented here has ratified that convention, has promised to abide by it, and as best it can, to incorporate its provisions into national law. And when they come into national law, that's our kind of best chance for something that is sustainable, and that is that all can be held to account. We've been talking today about tech platforms being held to account, and that is vital and perhaps the biggest change. But we can also think about our governments being held to account. When our ministries of education do procurement for EdTech in schools, Are they building in child rights? Are they thinking about the possible harms? That's a great moment to exercise a very significant budget to make sure that big tech is playing by our rules, not theirs. Children's interests, not just profit. And we could say the same in any other sector. When we procure tech, especially now AI, to make judgments in our courts or our health systems or our child welfare provision, those are all levers. Those are all moments that we maybe have a little more access to and where our discussion can bring some real benefit. So in addition to the convention, I've also put up an image of General Comment 25, which is where the Committee on the Rights of the Child explains, if you like, how all of the rights to safety, to privacy, to inclusion, to voice, to play, how do they look in a digital world? And if you haven't already read it, I urge you to read it. It's only 20 pages long. And it is actually a very practical way of thinking about rights in a digital world and a set of guidance for states, for governments about what concretely they can do. And it respects the holism, if you like, of a child rights framework, that we can't just focus in the Ministry of Education on tech for education without thinking what is happening in the Ministry of Health and the child's right to health and well-being, and what is happening in the business ministry that is looking to maximize investment in a country without necessarily. So I know it's hard for ministers to speak to each other, but there are many here, so I have great hopes. And I especially wanted to say, in addition to policymakers, there is an industry which is not just, it is largely dominated by tech oligarchs, but there are very, very many actors, and many of them are also asking themselves, what does good look like? What is it that we are asking of them? What would a good game look like for children? They could make money from this game or that game, but what would a good one look like? What does good ed tech look like? And so in our work, we've been particularly trying to work with developers and designers, the ones who practically are making these resources. And we published a report for UNDP last week, which tracked the challenges that they face. And I think that's something we haven't talked about enough yet, because there is, if you like, a capacity building challenge for the very many people working in the tech sector who haven't heard of the laws that they need to, because they studied engineering and now they're somewhere in the middle of a company, or maybe they have a startup and they haven't read GDPR or DSA, and these seem rather intimidating. One example I'll give you is talking to someone who was making a little app for the very nice purpose of encouraging girls to learn to code. And I said, okay, so what about safety? Can they share the code? Can others be in touch with them? And they said, oh, I'm concentrating on getting in the App Store, and I'll get to safety next year. And I just thought that is, there are many like that who would like to know what are the minimum standards, like to know what good looks like, and with that them in mind especially, I'm going to, this is my last slide that I just want to dwell on a little, because we tried to find a way to tell them what does good look like. And we synthesized the 42 articles of the Convention of the Rights of the Child and everything in General Comment 25 into 11 principles. The 11 principles could guide policymakers to make sure they've as it were, ticked all the boxes, remembered that when they focus on safety, they must also think about children's participation. When they think about children's privacy, they must also remember their right to play or the need of disabled children to be included on a fair basis and so forth. So the developers and designers said, give us something that goes on the wall. Don't tell us what to do, because you're not an engineer or a designer, but give us, as it were, the questions. And then behind the questions, give us a toolkit. And I think you'll see that this kind of builds on the logic that we've heard about this morning. Privacy by design, safety by design. Companies are getting used to those ideas. But if we just do privacy, if we just do safety, that would be a huge win. But it would not be enough. It would not be child rights respecting. And it might be that children are banned from, excluded from many opportunities that they also have a right to. And that's why we've tried to put safety and privacy and inclusion together also with participation and well-being. And just a few rights, and I'll end on these points that I think we still need to think a lot more about. So one is the right that Article 3.1 in the Convention, the child's right that their best interest should be a primary consideration. And that's, if you like, the balancing right. You know, how do we kind of think about how much privacy, safety, but also play and learning and agency? How do we, and we need to be articulate and we need to be clear, what do we think is in the best interest of the child? So we can put that up against the profit of the companies and say that's their commercial interest. But we would say this is what is best for children. And then we need to do that, and I'm sorry this makes life truly difficult, but we need to do it in an age-appropriate way. Because Article 5 is that we need to think about the evolving capacities of the child. And the evolving capacities of the child are such that we need to enable them to be rights holders and agents as early as possible, and we need to protect them as long as they need it. And somewhere in that space between enabling and protection, they need a bit of space to grow and make mistakes and not come to a disaster. And so working out what does good look like in the best interest of the child in a way that is age appropriate, I offer you that as a challenge. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor Sonia Livingstone. And I hope you all take the time to contact Sonia, to contact for more information and data. Incredible. Just shortly, if you want to mention any promising initiative you've seen going on, any development in a promising direction.
So I think that there are governments around the world that are doing some promising things. Okay, I might give the example of the Age-Appropriate Design Code, which is a kind of privacy data protection code, began in Britain, is now spreading in California, in Indonesia, being discussed in Australia, in Brazil. You know, there are some good ideas, maybe because they are very focused on a particular thing, children's data. They fly a little under the radar of some of these very big discussions about reigning in big tech. But horizontally, I think they begin to show things are possible.
Very concrete. What was the name of it again?
Age-Appropriate Design Code.
Age-Appropriate Design Code. Everyone's writing it down. Thank you so much, Sonia Livingstone. Incredible. Thank you. And now it is time to finish our broadcast for today. We will keep going, keep working with the experts here in Brussels, of course. And if you see this link here, you can do the QR code if you want. If you follow this link here, you will access everything from today, including this entire broadcast, the information, the presentations, the slides. Please do that. And once again, thank you all speakers and contributors for today. Thank you.